Whenever we're up against a big, tough social problem, there's one solution that just keeps coming up, right? It feels like plain old common sense, a strong, clear answer. And that answer is punishment. So today, we're going to dig into that idea and see if it's really as simple as it seems.
I mean, this is the basic thinking, right? It just feels right. If a behavior is a problem, you just make the penalty for it painful enough and boom, people will stop doing it. And look, that very assumption is behind so much of our public policy. But the big question we're asking today is, does it really work like that?
Okay, so before we start poking holes in this whole idea, let's just ask, why are we so drawn to punishment in the first place? I mean, why is it our go-to? Turns out that instinct is really human, and it's super powerful for a couple of key reasons. Well, for one, when you're dealing with a problem that's just messy and complicated, punishment feels so decisive, right? It feels like you're finally taking a stand, doing something tangible, something now. It just cuts right through all the debate and gives us this feeling of being in control. And it's also about sending a signal, a really strong one. Imposing a penalty basically shouts, hey, we as a society are drawing a line in the sand right here. It reassures us that our values mean something and that they're being upheld.
And you can see just how clean that logic looks on the surface. It's like a simple recipe, right? Step 1, a behavior is bad. Step 2, make the penalty bad enough. Step 3, people stop. It feels almost like a law of nature. And it's that very simplicity that makes it our default move for almost everything. But, as you probably guessed, reality is a whole lot messier.
Okay, now to be fair, this logic isn't completely wrong. Punishment absolutely can work. The thing is, it only works under a very specific and kind of rare set of circumstances. So let's take a look at what those perfect conditions actually are.
Think about something like a parking ticket, right? Getting one is usually a one-off thing, not a lifestyle. Pretty much everyone driving has the same choice to pay the meter or not. Enforcement is pretty consistent. You know the parking attendant might come by, and the cost of just doing the right thing, plugging the meter, is pretty low. So yeah, in a situation like that, a penalty is actually a great tool.
But here's the rub. The really big, thorny problems we try to solve with punishment, they look nothing like a parking violation. We're talking about behaviors that are ongoing, not occasional. They're often shaped way more by someone's situation than by a simple choice. They're all tangled up in things like inequality, stress, or even just trying to survive. And that is where that simple, neat logic just completely falls apart.
So what actually happens when we take that simple tool and try to use it on a really complex problem? Well, the behavior doesn't just vanish. It changes, it adapts, it evolves. And folks, this right here is the absolute key to understanding this whole thing.
This really gets to the heart of it. We expect that if we just crank up the punishment, the behavior will stop, period. But what really happens, what we see time and time again, is that the behavior just adapts to the pressure. It doesn't go away, it just changes shape. So how exactly does it adapt? Well, first, the behavior just gets more hidden. It goes underground. People get clever about not getting caught. Then you see intermediaries pop up, middlemen who get paid to manage the new risk. And here's the most important part. The risk doesn't vanish. It just gets concentrated. It flows downhill, like water, and pools around the people who have the fewest options and the least power to protect themselves.
And look, this is so important to understand. This isn't really about morals or people just deciding to be defiant. It's about resources. It's about who has options. People with money, with connections, with choices, they find ways to work around the rules. But people without those things, they're the ones left holding the bag, forced to take on all that risk. So punishment, when you apply it to a system like this, often ends up just making inequality even worse.
Okay, but we're not done yet. There's another massive piece of this puzzle we almost always forget about. See, a penalty written down in a law book is one thing, but actually enforcing it out there in the real world, that's a whole different ballgame. It takes a system, a big one, and that system comes with its own set of costs.
So that leads to a pretty simple question, right? Who actually gets punished? It sounds straightforward, but when you look at who's getting stopped, who's being searched, who's being charged, well, that's when you start to see the hidden tilts in the system. It's almost never as neutral as we imagine.
And this really breaks down why that happens. Enforcement is rarely random. It tends to follow the path of least resistance. Think about it. Agencies need to show they're getting results, right? So that pushes them toward the easy wins, cases that are simple to find and simple to prosecute.
And that means the focus naturally drifts toward people who are more visible and who don't have the money or power to fight back. It's not always about bad people making bad decisions, it's about how the whole system is set up to work.
Because here's the thing. When we decide to rely on punishment as our main tool, we're not just writing a rule. We're committing to building and paying for the huge, expensive machine that's required to actually enforce that rule.
I mean, just think about all the direct costs. We're talking about policing, the court systems, legal aid, the prisons themselves, probation, all the electronic monitoring. Every single one of those is a giant expense, a constant drain on resources that's not actually fixing the root cause, but just managing the fallout.
But the costs you see on a budget sheet are only part of the story. Then you've got all the knock-on effects, the human costs. We're talking about families being torn apart, people finding it impossible to get a job, worse health outcomes. And the real kicker? All of this often leads to a higher chance that someone will reoffend, which creates the exact problem we were trying to punish away to begin with.
And this all creates a really dangerous feedback loop. What happens is, when the punishment policy doesn't work, we don't say, maybe this was the wrong approach. Instead, the failure is held up as proof that we just weren't tough enough. So what's the answer? More punishment. We just double down. The goal isn't really about solving the problem anymore. It's about looking tough.
So if we're stuck in this cycle, and it's clearly not getting us where we want to go, maybe the issue isn't our answer. Maybe the issue is the question we've been asking all along. What if we tried to reframe the whole problem?
The old question has always been, how do we stop this behavior? It's simple, it's direct, and as we've just seen, it often leads us right into a wall. So what if we started asking different questions? Questions like, what actually happens when we try this? Who finds a way to adapt, and who ends up paying the price? These questions are harder, for sure, but they force us to be a lot more honest about the real-world consequences.
And you know, once you start asking those kinds of questions, this whole strategy of relying on punishment starts to look, well, really different. It starts to feel a lot less like a solution and a lot more like we're just rearranging the harm, basically just shifting pain from one place to another at a huge cost to all of us.
Now, let's be crystal clear here. This is not an argument for a world with no rules or no consequences. Of course not. Some things are just wrong and require a strong, clear response. The real challenge here isn't to throw away the hammer entirely. It's to finally admit that not every single problem is a nail. And maybe to have the courage to ask ourselves a really tough question. Are we actually trying to solve the problem, or are we just paying a fortune to move the harm around?